Hello, everyone. My name is Chip Bell, and I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Security Compass. And welcome to our Security by Design webinar series. In this webinar, we'll discuss how the law and regulations support security by design for protection of both customers and businesses. Now, in this webinar, you can expect to hear a leading technology law practitioner interpret the April publication from CISA and share his perspective on what responsibilities lie with businesses and how countries may respond to further regulation. Learn how the US cyber trust mark is a step in the right direction for protecting consumers, and what else the industry might expect with other similar initiatives globally. And lastly, explore how the law learns how best to protect in the case of unprecedented technology, in particular, what we could expect in the law when it comes to governance and use of AI and protection of copyright.
I'm Isabella Orias, and I'm a product marketing manager at Security Compass. And joining us today is Donald B. Johnston. Don is a partner and technology lawyer at Aird & Burles, Toronto. And some highlights from what he does is negotiating, among other arrangements, data center transactions on the buyer side. He also advises on privacy and the nexus between privacy and security. Don is a co-founder of the Canadian Technology Law Association. Welcome, Don.
Hey, it's great to be here, and it's a great follow-up to the conference of a few months ago when I had a chance to meet so many great folks at the who are interested in that equilibrium event that you put on. I hope that there will be many of them. It was fabulous, absolutely fabulous, and I'm grateful to have an opportunity to follow up on it.
For sure. And we're grateful to have you and continue the conversation, especially as things develop and progress in this space. So perhaps, Chip, we can start by maybe talking about the importance of CISA and a paper that was just published.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the recent updates with security by design in the industry. So CISA, in coordination with government agencies from Canada, US, Australia, UK, Germany, Netherlands, and New Zealand, published a paper this year titled Shifting the Balance of Cybersecurity Risks, Principles and Approaches for Security by Design and Security by Default. Now, in this paper, the agencies recommend manufacturers to build their products in a way that prevents customers from having to constantly perform monitoring, routine updates, and damage control to mitigate cyber risk. The burden of security should not fall on the shoulders of customers. Customers expect their products to be secure out of the box with little configuration changes necessary. Now, to make this happen, organizations must migrate from the vulnerability by design approach and embrace security by design. Now, customer security should be a core business goal and not an afterthought, where vulnerabilities are addressed once the product is in production. Security by design is essential in providing a good customer experience and one that will minimize the chance of security breach, which can lead to damaged reputation and loss of customer trust. Now, this shift will not happen overnight, as this is a major change. So a small initiative to get started is by embracing Rust. So Rust is a programming language developed with security in mind. Rust facilitates scalability and concurrency and is suitable for building heavy applications.
Great. Thanks for that intro, Chip, on that shifting the balance. Don, did you have any thoughts and perspectives on that paper and how those agencies came together?
Yeah. First of all, read the paper. It's wonderful. It's, I think, maybe 12 or 13 pages plus an index, but they really did an excellent job of nailing down the issues. And as Chip mentioned, it's not, even though CISA is a U.S. agency. I mean, basically, it's the folks upstairs from Homeland Security. It's part of Homeland Security. But even though that's the case, several other countries have joined in, including Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Netherlands, I think. And there will be, I think, more collaboration as time goes on. But those are the sort of co-authors of the paper. And you can tell that really smart people put a lot of thought into it. But I think it's important to kind of drill down on what they're saying. They raised a couple of comments or a couple of, let's say, subject matters that are at the heart of the initiative: secure by design and secure by default. And these are different things. They're complementary things, but they're different things. So as Chip said, secure by design means that the tech products are basically built to resist cyber malice of all kinds. So folks are always out there trying to gain access to our devices and data and infrastructure, for that matter. Some of them are government actors, some of them are private, but they're that malice is definitely there. And what CISA is saying is, look, developers must take ownership of security outcomes. And this means that they have to do risk assessment, include protections in their designs that sort of anticipate what cyber threats are coming down the road, not just looking after what currently exists, but thinking ahead. They're encouraged to use a tailored threat model during the development process, and basically that means getting in early. This is what a threat model is all about: is figuring out threats before they happen. So getting in early, figuring out what kinds of threats there could be that are represented by this technology, and deal with it from the earliest stage. So they refer to it as a kind of holistic approach to security, and I always laugh when I hear that word holistic, because it describes schemes where you put a pyramid over your head, wear patchouli oils, and definitely follow a vegan diet. No criticism of vegans, but that's what I associate with holistic. And what they're really talking about, of course, is a systematic and thorough approach to security. They are looking for companies to invest resources at each layer of the product design and ultimate development of the product. So not just sort of later on coming and saying, well, we forgot about security, how can we fix this? So where it becomes something that is the subject of leadership by C-suite executives right from the beginning of development, then that is exactly what CISA is looking for. And their argument is that security is actually not just a technical matter, but it should be a business priority. And they postulate that you'll make more money as a technology provider if what you make is secure by design. I don't know about that. Maybe yes, maybe no. But that's their argument. But I would agree that making security a business priority is good business. There's not too much of a doubt about that in my mind. As Chip mentioned, they're looking for people to use not a particular programming language, but any one of these sort of programming languages that eliminate widespread vulnerabilities. And they do mention JavaScript and Python, C++, assembly, Ruby, Perl, Perl type sort of let's say bundled with JavaScript. The thing about those programming languages is that they are respectful of computer memory, and we're going to talk in a little while, I hope, if there's time, about some of the memory protecting technologies that are out there. But fundamentally, what I mean is that secure by design prioritizes security and features mechanisms and implementation of tools that protect customers first, instead of necessarily prioritizing whiz-bang cool features that may end up enlarging the attack surface for cyber criminals. So that's secure by design. I mentioned also secure by default, which is part of the April paper. And what that means is that tech products need to be resilient right out of the box to any kind of cyber threats. Well, they can't obviously be resilient to every kind of cyber threat, and certainly not necessarily future cyber threats that haven't been thought of yet. But they're supposed to, if they're compliant with CIST's requirements or recommendations, they're supposed to be resilient out of the box for just about whatever is out there at the moment. And it's a little bit like flying an airplane or in an airplane. If you're a passenger in an airplane, you know that they don't make you totally responsible for security in the airplane. They expect you to follow certain behaviors, and if you don't, they'll kick you off the plane. And they're great videos to watch on YouTube. But they do all the heavy lifting, let's say, as far as security is concerned. They've pre-checked the folks who load bags, and they take X-rays. They frisk everybody, and you don't have to do very much other than don't bring liquids with you, and try not to open the door when you're up there. That's secure by default in an airplane sense, and so that's what they mean. Whatever the way that the technology comes should be secure by default, have a baseline security configuration, and the customer should not have to get into all kinds of configuration to nail down security. Now, of course, you can, and maybe you should, but it does come ready. So no default passwords, requirement for multi-factor authentication, for example, single sign-on, and SAML or OpenID Connect, secure logging, probably recommendations about what the security settings should be, and essentially making it easier and quicker to harden a system, so you don't need to get into all kinds of configuration in order to harden the system. It comes, in a sense, pre-hardened. So kind of good for lazy people, amateurs, and people who are in a rush to roll out some technology. But I thought that paper was absolutely terrific, and well worth reading. Sorry, I blabbed on for too much, but I am a lawyer.
No, I thought it was great. I mean, like we're talking here about I don't want to call it a burden, but the responsibility of security being placed on the businesses, the manufacturers, retailers, perhaps, and in response to the right and expectation of consumers for security and for their protection. So I think it's really key that and I thought the paper did a great job in having it in very plain language, not being so prescriptive in that sense, but also leaving room for all of that interpretation while protecting those interests of like the individual, the citizen, society at large. So I really appreciated also that like the airplane metaphor, right? Like we at all those layers where really like your responsibility once you're up in the air is like follow the rules and like have a
you don't
safe
have to
flight,
do a lot.
right? Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right.
Exactly. Now I know we also talked a little bit about like in conversation before about maybe how they're doing it a little bit differently in Europe, and like perhaps the Cyber Resilience Act and how that act itself upholds security by default and advocates for security by design. Do you want to talk to us a little bit more about that? And I know Chip, I don't know if you had any questions about that specifically.
If you do, you can do them now, or you can do them after. Up to you.
I don't have that, but is it fine if I go back to what you said, Don, about security by design? So like
Sure.
the paper is great, I agree, but some of the hardest things is change management. And so, I'm product security, application security, we see the value in this. But I think a lot of us, if we want to make this shift, it has to come from the top down. So how would you approach, let's say, even from your side, would you approach executives to get them on board with, because this is the major change, like to take on the security by design approach?
Yeah, so executives don't know. Well, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, executives don't know as much as the developers know about software development, and they're not supposed to. But what they do need to understand is money and the preservation of the business. So there's this tension between getting a minimum viable product out the door on one hand, and on the other hand, getting something out that is going to, let's say, preserve and enhance the business reputation of the business, because executives are supposed to be, I don't know if they all necessarily agree with this, but I think business executives are supposed to be thinking about the long-term best interests of the companies they serve. And they're supposed to be acting in accordance with what maximizes shareholder value. Well, losing money is not maximizing shareholder value, and damaging the reputation of the company, not only for this product, but all products that come up afterwards, is not good for shareholder value. There are examples of car companies that brought out lemons, and they had to deal with that. They had buyback programs and all kinds of things to preserve the long-term interests of the company. Buying back cars doesn't make you money, not right away, but buying back cars might be the way to preserve the company and keep it in existence so that it can live to fight another day. So when you're approaching senior executives, and indeed even board members, about this, they have to get on side with the idea that sending terrible products out the door that could attract cyber actors that are malicious, it is really bad for the company, bad for their career, and just comprehensively bad for the public. And they shouldn't want to be associated with it. So I think that's the key to getting them on board early. You can, in the long run, you will make more money, and everybody will pat you on the back if you follow these rules. So that's the only way to get them aboard, I think.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, it always comes down to the bottom line. Sorry, Isabella, for going back.
Oh, no problem. I think it's a good idea to go back, because I think like that brings up a good point as well around Dawn, you talked about that tension between having like shipping out a minimum viable product, but at the same time, like you don't like we're not in the business also of having so many security requirements that prevent engineers and product from getting it out there. Like that's certainly not what we want to do. But we still want to ship products out that are working great and are working securely, because we want to make sure that there's no added risk to the company, like all those risks, as you said, about to the bottom line, right? Like if it's going to cost you in the long run, not just dollars, but also reputation and brand trust, like that's really key. So yeah, like Chip, like I think it was worth going back for sure.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. But speaking also of like sort of tips for maybe practitioners, and you talk a lot about or we've talked before about developers and those who are on the floor getting it done. But maybe we can talk about a little bit about like the practical guidance for vendors and practitioners around perhaps those objectives, like when it comes to product security. I know from before you talked about perhaps like 4 specific objectives that help, right? So if you can elaborate on that.
Well, yeah, and in fact, this is the 4 objectives that I think you're referring to are actually in the EU cyber resilience legislation. What's interesting about that legislation, before I get into what the 4 things are, what's interesting is that it actually is not aimed at non-embedded software. It's aimed at embedded software, but refrigerators, cars, and that kind of thing. In fact, in some cases, it may even address devices that don't even have an operating system. They have drivers that are not coupled with an OS at all, but they do simple things. But even simple things, need to have security. Sometimes it's easier to program security into simple products, but the big gap in the Cyber Resilience Act in Europe is exactly that it doesn't address non-embedded software. It addresses basically, let's call it firmware in a rough sort of way, and of course embedded software is desperately in need of cybersecurity as well. But just getting into what the Cyber Resilience Act does in terms of embedded software is that it recognizes that there exists just a crazy low level of cybersecurity in all kinds of products, and we've heard the crazy sort of stories about, robot vacuum cleaners spying on people and that kind of thing, because they have, some of them have cameras, that kind of thing, and Siri and other sort of constantly listening devices, listening and recording and that kind of thing. So, there are lots of vulnerabilities, and in many of these devices. And what is really desperately bad, and that the legislation wants to correct, is this really lackadaisical or even ignorant approach to upgrades and updates to patch vulnerabilities that are discovered. And the second thing is that there's, people generally don't necessarily know how and when to patch their refrigerator or their whatever device in their home that is, it turns out to be vulnerable to attack. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go to get the patches. They don't even know if patches are available. And so the legislation was enacted to basically address IoT type or devices that are dependent on weak and vulnerable firmware that nobody quite knows how to fix. And so that this act then comes up with these 4 objectives. And these are the 4 objectives that I think you're asking me to talk about. And even if they're not, I'm going to talk about them anyway, Isabella. The first objective is to ensure that manufacturers improve the security of products that are digital, or that have digital elements, let's put it that way, right from the beginning of the design and development phase and throughout the entire development life cycle, including the life cycle of the product itself. So it's not just development, that's the CIST approach, but it's actually the whole process of owning whatever it is you're owning and being able to maintain it as a protected device. Secondly, ensuring a coherent cybersecurity framework that facilitates compliance. This is not really a tip for developers, but it's a requirement that developers maintain a cybersecurity framework. And of course, they would look to CIST and NIST and so forth for that kind of help. The third one is to enhance the transparency. And this is a huge thing, enhance the transparency of security characteristics of these products. You know, we don't know what our robot vacuum cleaners are doing. Be nice to know. I'm not suggesting that, you know, fleets of armed robot vacuum cleaners are going to take over the world and become our overlords at any time, but we should know. And then finally, the fourth objective of the Act is to enable businesses and consumers to use these products in a secure manner. And these all sort of join together, all these four tips or four objectives of the Act. They're certainly, I think, great objectives. I think the issue is going to be in the implementation and enforcement of that legislation. Very, very, very difficult to do. And I'll probably end up saying the same thing about Canada's legislation as well a little bit later, if we have time to get to AI.
One thing I like, Don, is look at the product level, because like, oh, you think a product is hardware, in some cases, firmware and software. So that distinction of all these things go together to make good customer experience. Now I'm curious with the Cyber Resilience Act, you know, I'm building a refrigerator, not all my components I built in-house. How does it regulate using third-party vendors? Because that is something that can be overlooked at times.
Yeah, and it's in fact, I don't know about security, but I know that in the privacy end of things, it's always third parties that are causing the problems and headaches. You know, for companies like Home Hardware and others. Sorry, Home Depot. I mean, it's just a fact that you don't always know, despite assurances about the performance of third parties, and in this case, the performance of third-party components. And so the Act addresses that in terms of principle, that you have to improve the security of your products, and it just means that you have to improve the security of your products in again, that I'm going to use the vegan word, holistically, which means third-party components, your own designs, your own solutions. They all have to be cyber secure. That's why I mentioned the how of it is really hard. The devil is in the details on how to do that. But you'll still get the blame in Europe, and you'll have to explain it to a judge if things go wrong.
Yeah, so the law sort of upholds it by principle and addresses it on the principle level. Manufacturers have to address it on a requirements and compliance level and attestations against those requirements. And then, you know, and those are all in place to protect the consumers and the end users, to make sure that their security requirements or really security expectations are met. Chip, I don't know if you know, like we talked a little bit about practitioners, but do you have a perspective on sort of like software security principles and how that, you know, how we've seen that, like even with whether it's in our own customers or the market or practitioners, as well as Don said, like sort of the devil's in the details?
Yeah, I think just the approach of the devil's in the details, and I think Don's going to call it the limitations. The Resilience Act is practitioners, developers need guidance. They need best practices. And this is where for organizations looking for this, the importance of NIST secure software development framework. It's a good way to get started. And it describes a set of fundamental sound practices to secure software development. And I think, Don, when we talked before too about third party, it really also focuses too on how to include sharing security requirements for third party vendors to ensure that it upholds the integrity of the product.
Yeah, so it implies things like building into your contracts audit rights. You know that just getting an assurance from a supplier that the products are okay is not enough. You have to trust but verify. And so the idea of product development audits on your third-party providers is a perfectly legitimate and expected thing. But you can't do it unless it's in the contract, unless they're nice guys, and you threaten not to renew them for the next batch. But you know, it really has to do with making sure that all the legal instruments are in place to allow you to do the checking that you need to do to know what you know.
Well, speaking of trust and even maybe certifications and labeling, like the Biden-Harris administration in July announced this initiative called the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark, and feels like another move towards that shift to protect customers and end users by really placing the responsibility on manufacturers and retailers. So some of the bigger retailers that have come on board, Amazon, Best Buy, Google, LG Electronics, Logitech, and Samsung, they got on board right away. And it follows the NIST standards, has these characteristics around having a QR link so that you have a national registry of certified devices. The NIST, where it defines like security for consumer routers, and then some guidance for the Department of Energy for labeling requirements for things like smart meters and power inverters. And I think as you said, you talked about like the lazy person, or maybe like the average hardworking American, as the Biden-Harris administration puts it. But like having that mark and having like that means a lot. And of course, like retailers and manufacturers should strive towards that. But I want to ask you if maybe your thoughts on the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark. Like, what do you don't like about it? What do you think? Where do you think it maybe is still lacking, or where do you think it should go?
Yeah, no, I think it's genius. And our American friends have a very healthy attitude of sort of respectful doubt about government. Let's put it that way. They're not inclined to necessarily trust everything that the government says and does. And it's pretty healthy, actually. It's not a bad attitude to have, because it really requires the government to bend over backwards. This mark, I think, has the capacity to really not only enhance knowledge of customers for, let's say, so-called secure devices, because it is designed to support consumers, not others. The cyber trust mark will enable people to say, okay, these products that I'm about to buy at Best Buy or wherever, they have the cyber trust mark. I know I can trust it. The great sort of subtext to this is it actually enhances the U.S. government's position with people and makes the government itself more trustworthy, I think, or have the aura of being more trustworthy. And I do think that people will rely on the cyber trust mark. They'll look for it. The same as people rely on ISO certification. And I love it. I think that it's going to be totally successful. It also, of course, points to the NIST standards, which I think we really should talk about if there's a bit of time, because that's the part that I think will engender trust in the development community. I think the cyber trust mark is something that developers and product sellers are going to want to have. Same as UL certification or CSA or any of those other certifications that, of course, many of them are mandatory. This one is not mandatory, but it'll, I think, become in effect mandatory just because of its ubiquitous nature.
For sure. And maybe going back to what and spending a little bit of time there on the NIST standards. And this is a question, I guess, to either of you. But yeah, what can we, I mean, obviously the consumers aren't going to be going out there to look at the NIST standards and to educate themselves on it. But what can producers, manufacturers, software vendors, what can they continue to do, like with regards to NIST standards? And maybe I'll start off with Chip, like if you don't mind.
The heart of it, of course, is the secure software development framework that NIST. That's not new. That's been around for a while. Fundamentally, what NIST is saying is, look, use programming languages that are memory safe and enable fine-grained memory protection like Cherry, which is not new exactly, but it's become more popular recently. Under that approach to memory control, it requires architectural changes. So you change data pathways, you add some registers to the CPU and memory systems. You add integrity checks to prevent read, write, execute errors or deliberate interference. Prevents using corrupted pointers, which is pretty common vulnerability. And it recommends support by a complete compiler tool chain, multiple operating systems, and make sure that the pointers are have a sort of a bounded address range that you can't extend. As soon as you can extend the range of where a pointer is pointing, of course, you can mess up the memory of a computer. They want you to use secure software components. They want you to use web templates that avoid cross-site scripting, which is a major issue. They want you to use queries that avoid SQL injection attacks. It's a whole list of them here. It's really amazing as a kind of checklist for how to develop software using the secure framework. I mean, there are at least a dozen of them. And in any event, if a developer doesn't implement, let's say, multi-factor authentication or any of the other requirements on NIST's list, then it can't, the development can't be said to be secure by design. This is the heart of secure by design. So, and as I mentioned, the US Cyber Trust mark says that you can earn the mark by complying with the secure software development framework. So it's and there may be some other requirements as well, but I think it's a terrific initiative. And by the way, they're doing it in Europe as well. Not the US Cyber Trust mark, but that's something NIST is doing, and we can talk about that if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always helpful for us to know. I think actually, Don, you and I talked about like sort of borders and how those don't really mean anything when it comes to the cyber world because
No such thing.
exactly that, right? There's almost no such thing. And so it's important to see like what our neighbors are doing and maybe learning from them. So you know, like how do you think NISA like upholds these same standards or similar standards and what could we possibly be learning from the EU?
Yeah, so NISA, just for those who don't know, it's the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity. And I don't actually know what the acronym is. It may be a mixture of languages, but that's their cybersecurity agency, and it's the regulator under the proposed EU Data Act. But one of the things that NISA does or is doing at the moment is putting together a certification program for businesses in the embedded business, the firmware business, the IoT business, under the Cybersecurity Act. And it's a little bit like the US cyber trust mark. That is the certification endpoint. If you become certified after having jumped through all the hoops that NISA lays out and that are contained in the Data Act and the Cybersecurity Act, you then get some kind of a certification that you can publish and brag about, a little bit like the US cyber trust mark. And so that's one of the jobs of NISA. And of course, because it's the regulator under the Data Act, which actually doesn't exist yet, except in the minds of the regulators. Can I talk about that a little bit, or do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the Data Act is really very interesting. I think it's highly flawed, but you know, it's still in the early stages. But it's based on the idea that the Internet of Things provides all kinds of surface area for incursions. You know, refrigerators. I keep coming back to refrigerators and vacuum cleaners, but of course that's kind of a joke. But the IoT does provide surface for incursion. It's true. There's been even a lot of hysteria over cars, you know, which are IoT devices. They're edge devices that are computers with wheels. And if they have some driver assist or autonomous driving functionalities, the current concern everybody has is that they could be weaponized. And I personally don't have that concern, but I love the idea that people are worried about it. So the objective of the EU Data Act is to sort of allow data to be made available that's generated by the Internet of Things. In other words, they're not trying to shut it all down. They're saying, okay, we recognize there's some data. We want to be able to regulate access to that data so that it can't be used in malevolent ways. It can only be used in beneficial ways. And they kind of divide and this is where one of the weaknesses of it is. They divide the world up into two groups, big tech and little tech. And they say, okay, well, if you're little tech, you can access this data, but if you're big tech, oh, no, you can't have it. And I just, I mean, that would never pass muster in Delaware, but you know, but they might be able to get away with it in Europe or something like it. So the idea is that you can contribute data and you can request data, and the data availability has to be made available. Sorry, the data availability has to be by design. So the idea is that you build into your IoT device a way of interface with the device that will allow permissioned entities to receive that data and use the data for beneficial purposes, not including competition. And that's where I think it's going to be really hard to enforce. So they're trying to help SMEs, which I think is great, but you know, it's hard to say SMEs can have this data, but nobody else can. And of course, there are all kinds of workarounds. All the big companies will go out and make arrangements with SMEs, and the SMEs will not be able to deliver the data to the big companies, but they'll be able to deliver insights from the data to the big companies. And there you go. There's access in the Act for public bodies to this data. I don't actually know how public bodies might use the data, but you know, the access is there. And that's a sort of a European approach to information. Even, for example, in European privacy law, everything is nailed down very tightly. But exception, criminal investigations, right? That's pretty well wide open. So the other thing they want people to be able to do at the consumer level or SME level is to easily be able to switch between cloud providers. Cloud providers are you know, without mentioning any names, but their initials are AWS, that kind of thing. You know, they're seen as big, powerful, nasty folks. I don't agree, but they want to make sure that people can switch between cloud providers if necessary, and even provide a 30-day right of termination, notwithstanding the duration of a contract. So, and we saw this with cell phones, you know, where the government stepped in and said, no, you can't nail somebody down to a 5-year cell phone contract, and the telecommunications companies all caved on it, and it hasn't hurt their business at all. It made them more competitive. They want to keep European data in Europe, which is understandable, and they've created a kind of interoperability standard so that data will be useful, and then they've created a sort of system for dispute resolution outside the courts. So if there's an argument between entities seeking or generating IoT data, and they end up at a Donnybrook over it, well, that can be settled, and it doesn't have to cost a fortune. Sure. So it's a good approach, and I hope that they'll be able to pull it off. But I think the Act is ultimately going to look different from the way it's proposed currently. Well worth the effort.
For sure. Well, speaking of you know, learning as we go and starting out and then where we end up, I want to make sure that we spend time talking about precedents, and maybe especially with unprecedented technology. And I know, Chip, you were really curious about this, like with regards to AI being on everyone's mind. So I'll turn it over to you. And I know you have a couple questions for Don regarding AI.
Yeah, you know, I think the misconception, oh, AI is this new topic, it's been prevalent for years. It's been around. I mean, I think we're seeing proliferation of generative AI. I guess my question for you is, because we see some companies adopting it, we see major companies banning it. How do you see the law regulating artificial intelligence, in particular generative AI? Because not a ton in place, but I'm curious from your perspective, where do you see the landscape going?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to have to confess my own prejudice, let's say, or bias here. I don't like it when governments try to get way out ahead of everything and you know, fix it before it's broke. You know, Canada gets a lot of criticism for being slow. No, that shouldn't be criticism. Wait and see is actually it works for the economy, and it works for it works for this type of thing as well. I think that as you say, we've had certainly automatic decision making, which is the sort of other way of talking about artificial intelligence. We've had automatic decision making for many years, and it's even addressed in legislation that protects privacy. So the fact that it's an artificial intelligence engine that is involved in the automatic decision making doesn't make it somehow different. So you know, for example, Canada has proposed an Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, ADA. It's received a fair amount of criticism, which is great. It's still in discussion phases, and the regulations are nowhere near, as far as I know anyway, nowhere near being ready for prime time. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association has said, look, ADA is defective because it actually doesn't elevate any of the ideas in the act to matters of human rights. The association wants any artificial intelligence legislation to talk about human rights first. And indeed, we've seen this with privacy law, where it has been recognized in many countries that privacy is a human right. Okay, how can that same concept be applied to artificial intelligence, especially where there are decisions being made in connection with a person? The difference, of course, is that in privacy law, it's an identifiable person. In security law, it doesn't have to be an identifiable person. It can be everybody or anybody. That's okay. I like that. So the ADA essentially, you know, is part of a package, at least, of an implementation act that is designed to protect consumer privacy on one hand, and sorry, I'm just my phone started to ring for some reason. I turned it off. So the act is essentially designed to address interprovincial or international business, manage anonymized data, which is that contrasts with privacy law. It requires an impact assessment to determine if the system is high impact or not high impact. If it's high impact, whatever that means, we don't know yet because the regs haven't been proposed. But if it's high impact, then the developer has to record and memorialize steps taken to meet compliance. It reminds me of every other sort of compliance statute, whether it's anti-money laundering or privacy. It means documenting the heck out of everything, so that you keep a careful record of what it is that you've done to comply. And if a system happens to be high impact, then there has to be a risk mitigation plan, and there's to be a monitoring plan. And Canada very typically has said, we also need a plain language statement of what it is that you're doing, and to, you know, what it is that your AI system does, how it does it at a high level, and how you've approached risk mitigation. That has to be in plain language so people can understand it. You don't need to be an engineer to figure it out. And then there's a reporting mechanism where if there's a material harm that an AI system actually does, a high risk AI system at least, high impact, then there has to be a report to the government of that material harm. And the act is going to be enforced by what they what they call administrative monetary penalties. No, it's not a fine. It's not punishment. It's an administrative monetary penalty in the millions of dollars. It hurts like a fine, but anyway, that's part of how it will be enforced. But it doesn't really address copyright issues and issues of bias in AI. Maybe that will be addressed by the regulations. I don't know, but it's pretty interesting. By the way, it doesn't apply to federal departments. It's only private sector. For federal government, that there are policies in place that cover the use of AI.
One thing like you called out too is the human rights aspect of this. I think sometimes you think it's technology that it's going to work well, it's fine. But you talked about this is if you train a model that has biases, once it's put in production, it's going to have biases as well. So I think that is something that needs to be looked into. Another thing that was a nice call out was regulation. Now, sometimes getting ahead is a bit challenging because you also do not want to stifle creativity, especially a new landscape. Functionality is changing over time. And this is why I think we're seeing organizations such as NIST come out with frameworks. So they recently, I think this year, came out with their NIST risk management framework with regards to building trustworthy AI systems and even like practical steps in a playbook. Just kind of your thoughts on the risk management framework and how companies should approach it, how they should use it.
Mm-hmm. The great thing about it is it is principles based, right? So I mean, there's a little bit of let's say black letter requirements, but really it's principles based or results based if you want, and that's a bit of a left turn for or shift left for NIST, which is more inclined to say do it this way, but NIST's approach seems to be to use a sort of a principled approach. So their work on AI is really, at least at present, sort of characterized by promoting research on AI, and they do it themselves. They do it in the universities and so forth. But the idea is to advance trustworthiness in AI. They want to apply AI R&D to the NIST laboratory programs. They're interested in establishing benchmarks and metrics for evaluating AI technologies, and that's a little more sort of results based, if you will, a way of saying, when we evaluate AI technologies, we need to look at the results of what they've done and not only the method by which they do it. And of course, NIST wants to take the lead in developing these standards, and they're also interested in and actively promoting ongoing consultation. So I think NIST sees this as a process that has a beginning but doesn't necessarily have an end. It's an ongoing process to develop policies around risk management and resource availability for people who want to develop AI systems, best practices and so forth, standards of course, which is at the heart and soul of what NIST does. Putting together working groups for doing that, from academia and business and the public probably as well, politicians and the like. And then of course they're very interested in, and I don't know how they're going to get there, but how they monitor AI on a going forward basis to make sure that our robotic overlords don't eventually kill us all. That's what NIST is doing, and there's a nice fact sheet that NIST has published that is worth taking a look at, because it contains a lot more detail than what I've just mentioned on what NIST's goals are for AI.
Yeah, and I think you talked a little bit about copyright issues maybe, and like what this introduces, and we probably have time for just one last section on AI and copyright.
You going to talk about that case?
Yeah, like, I was curious like what you thought, because like it's we've talked about, well, copyright and ownership and what this means, and especially with like we see the rise in generative AI, and so I'd like to hear a little bit about what you think with regards to that. Like we saw that they refused copyright to the plaintiff. This was in the case that was like I guess decided in August, but yeah. Talking about how copyright is designed to adopt with the times, and maybe we just to close us off, want to hear your perspective on that.
You're going to be so disappointed, Isabel. I take a very traditional approach to it. I think that for the time being, every IP practitioner knows that inventiveness and creation is something that's reserved to human beings. That I don't see that changing anytime soon. And in fact, as technology becomes more and more sort of omnipresent in everything that we do, the pushback will be there to actually maintain the presence of a human being as an essential element of creativity and invention. So you can't have a corporation that inventing anything. Corporations can own stuff, of course, but invention, even for example, in the patenting system, if you patent something, a person has to file the patent, and then the patent is assigned to an employer, maybe. Same thing with copyright. I was not at all surprised by the result of the case. I thought it was a great case. The case said that machine has no capacity to create copyright protected works, and the owner of the machine therefore does not have a copyright. I thought it was unsurprising, but it's caused a lot of fun discussion among lawyers and engineers and other nerds because it is an important case.
For sure. Well, I'm not disappointed at all by any of your answers. And, as usual, thank you so much, Don, for your time. And thank you, Chip, as well, for all your contributions to this conversation. Just want to close off by saying you can follow or connect with Don on LinkedIn at /DonaldJohnston2009. And if you wish to access any of our other helpful video content, please be sure to visit securitycompass.com/resource_videos. Thank you so much, Chip and Don, for your time today. And let's stay in touch.
It's been great. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye.